Welcome to Mayor Brown's International Arbitration Across the Pond podcast. Each episode is designed to provide insight on legal issues and other matters affecting international arbitration in the UK, US and around the world. The podcast is presented by two of Mayor Brown's international arbitration partners, Kwadwo Sarkodie from the firm's London office and Charles Harris from the firm's Chicago office. You can subscribe to this podcast on all major podcasting platforms, as well as Mayor Brown's YouTube channel. In this special edition, we are joined by guest speaker Steve Andersen, Vice President of the International Centre for Dispute, who will be discussing racial diversity and appointment of arbitrators. The content in this podcast represents the views of the speakers and not their respective organisations. We hope you enjoy the podcast.
I hope everyone is happy, safe, and healthy as always. Welcome to our podcast, International Arbitration Across the Pond. Let me start off by saying hello to my co-host, Kwadwo Sarkodie. Say hello, Kwadwo.
Yeah, really good to see you again across the pond, Charles, and great to be on board for this further podcast. Very, very interested to be talking about some of these important issues we'll be covering today on diversity.
Absolutely. So you stole my thunder there a little bit, but we have a timely topic to discuss today and a very special guest. So let me begin with the topic. Today, as Kwadwo just mentioned, we'll discuss diversity in international arbitration, particularly focusing on racial diversity and the appointment of arbitrators. And this is a topic that is really important to me because as a Black arbitrator, I can tell you that we often feel like we're not getting the same opportunities as our non-diverse colleagues to be seated on major arbitrations. And that is not just perception, it's actually borne out in the statistics that we see from arbitrable institutions and others. All that being said, I do think there's light at the end of the tunnel. And this is particularly because a lot of arbitrable institutions are taking steps to address the racial disparities in the appointment of arbitrators. And one of those organizations is the International Center for Dispute Resolution, or the ICDR. And a lot of people probably know the American Arbitration Association, or the AAA, and the ICDR is the international arm of the AAA. So with no further ado, we're excited to have with us today Steve Andersen, Esquire, I'll throw that in there, Vice President at the ICDR. Steve, if you don't know him already, is an ADR veteran, having over 25 years of experience in this space. And he's also been at the ICDR in various roles for 18 years. But importantly for this discussion today, Steve is responsible for managing the diversity of the ICDR's arbitration roster in North America and maybe elsewhere. Steve will tell us a little bit more about that. So Steve, why don't I just turn it over to you to give a few words about yourself?
Yeah, thank you both first for the opportunity to be with you today. It's a pleasure and an honor, really. And so I, as has been mentioned, have been doing this world of arbitration and mediation for a long, long time, and really, really enjoy it. I love the processes of arbitration and mediation. I love the principles of solving commercial disputes amicably and economically, and I love the diversity of cultures and people around the world and all those things that come with it. So that's just a little bit specifically some of our responsibilities, as alluded to, are North America. I work with our activities, our services. This is programs and events within North America, but also within certain industries around the world. And so I am also very focused and involved with our activities in Asia and in Europe and different things for, again, certain industries and practices. So that's my overall responsibilities. You know, it gets down to also sometimes we're working on rule changes right now and other aspects of that. So it's multifaceted and really, really enjoyable. So that's my background. And
okay. So a little bit more. So you have been a mediator, not an arbitrator, right?
That's right.
Okay, and your mediation experience. Tell us a little bit about that.
So it really is how I got into this, role with the AAA and ICDR was my undergraduate taught me mediation, and I just started taking training after training and fell in love with it, and was able to just start getting on small panels, whether it was court panels or other processes, and was able to do some mediations over the years sporadically. I speak Spanish fluently, so that's helped a little bit in certain nuances, and so that's really just a real enjoyment. I love seeing people create their own solutions to legitimate problems. I love the analysis that goes into that. It's not split the baby as we often think, but it's real business analysis, and it's working through solutions, rolling up sleeves, and so that's what kind of really drove me to getting into this world. And arbitration is great, but if I had to choose my role, it would be a mediator, right? So
Okay. Well, I'm total opposite. I enjoy being an arbitrator, but mediation. As a practitioner, I'm not a huge fan of mediation, particularly when money's at stake. Always no. Not to go any further. I'm just not. I'm just not.
And I'll jump in there to defend you, Steve. I'm actually a fan of mediation. I think it can be particularly effective
Right.
in working to resolve disputes as part of a suite of mechanisms. And of course, arbitration's a key one as well. Now, it's very interesting, Steve. You said you've been involved in ICDR 25 years, which is a impressive period. We're going to come to this in a little bit more detail as we work through. But over those 25 years, what have you seen change in terms of diversity with regard to arbitrators and arbitration appointments?
First, my one to say, Charles, it's 2 against 1 for mediation arbitration, just so we know where we're at.
Right. I see.
So that's, don't want to leave that behind. But so going back to the historical change in diversity, and this is anecdotal and just my perceptions, but one of my big struggles, and I remember one of my first programs, I went with the IBA, and it was a formal dinner, and it was 100 people, and there wasn't much diversity in that room to start with. And we were at a table, and one of the arbitrators across the table was frustrated about the expansion of more arbitrators into the community, and he had proposed that we create another threshold, another vetting source for this pool of arbitrators. And I challenged him. I was young, and probably, I don't know if I handled it very politically at that time, but I've always been about inclusion for me, and I don't like closed doors. I just don't. And but so that's been kind of the historical backdrop of international arbitration and its community. Is it's we've heard connotations of the clubs and there are a group of well-known elite arbitrators. I don't think we can blame them for this connotation or this feeling historically of being non-inclusive either, right? So that's a little bit of the backdrop. I would say that as we move forward, year by year, things started to change. And I think one of the things we talked about is something that we were doing, and we weren't really broadcasting it in terms of activity, but we would sit down annually in our executive team and ask, okay, who do we need to recruit in terms of diversity and bringing new people to the table, right? And we would go out and recruit and invite those individuals. And these weren't large numbers of people. And I think we can talk a little bit about why that is and why that still is to a certain degree. But, so we were able over the years to recruit and to mentor I think certain relationships and individuals and bring them into what I would call the profile of being an arbitrator in this community. And that's moved forward. And I know, at a certain time, gender diversity became a popular and a topic that was important, obviously, and also one that became one that groups and organizations started to promote collectively. And we have been doing work in that area, but before then I would sit down and analyze different countries and how we were doing in terms of diversity in that country. And we would intentionally recruit, whether it was gender or other ethnic individuals to our panel, or at least look to find out who we could, right? And so that's a little bit of backdrop to what we've been doing kind of behind the scenes, and to the public conversation about this in the past, over the years, right? So I think it's been a struggle. I still think there's challenges there, but it's certainly getting better. And I like that it's a conversation, and it's also a policy, and a lot of companies and law firms and our goals and policies hold that as well. So that's a little bit of backdrop.
Let me. We're going to get a lot deeper into some of those things you discussed. Let me ask you a little bit about the organizational structure of the AAA and the ICDR, because I don't think that a lot of people understand how it's structured and how things are set up.
Sure, that's great. So the American Arbitration Association has been around since 1926, and was doing, obviously, it's really the largest arbitral institution in the world, and we've been doing cases years and years and years. And I came in 1995 to the organization, and at that point, AAA was doing international and domestic cases. And then there was this big debate and discussion about the word American and whether international companies would accept a provider that was American, right? And so in '96, we separated and created this international division with its own rules, on arbitrators, on mediators, staff, and so on, to handle international matters. It's still under the umbrella of the AAA, so we have the great resources of the AAA, with whether that's software systems for administration and general counsel office, or IT in today, right? Those things are critical, and so that's the idea. And the real even going to case administration today, where we have one party or nuance that's an international party, you get ICDR administration, whether that's ICDR international arbitration rules or commercial rules. And so that's the concept. Arbitrators are separate, mediators are separate. Now, that's not to say that if there are occasions where, if there's a hearing in, let's say, Chicago, and they want a certain profile of arbitrator, we might invite a AAA arbitrator to be on a list. Whether they're picked or not, we're not sure, right? But that's sometimes the exchange that might happen in the relationship between AAA and ICDR.
Okay. To start off our substantive conversation, I thought maybe an interesting thing to do is to talk about why is diversity important in this space, because I think that's something that a lot of people don't truly understand, and they think there's just a moral obligation. I think there's intrinsic value, and I want to just give you some of the reasons that I think it's important from that aspect, and just get your reaction to it, and have a discussion about those things. So I have three. The first is diversity of perspectives and experience in the deliberative process will lead to better outcome.
Okay, good. So you let me react on each one. I'm glad.
Yeah.
I was going to make a list. I was going to be ready, but so I agree with you, and I really think diversity is important in this regard as well, because we are our own mind is influenced by our own perspectives and our own lifelong history of what we've brought to the table, right? Which we think is a world of experience, but it's not. We are sheltered, and even in the tough world neighborhoods, we're sheltered from other perspectives and other realities and other even intellectual thought processes and approaches, right? And so I agree with you on that, and I think we get a lot more comfortable when people think the same. And we're gonna, I like we've talked about, I agree that being uncomfortable is actually good, and that's also in the deliberative process. We don't want arbitrators who are just going to quickly take the pen and write out the easy award, right? We want someone who's really analyzing the points, the contentions on both sides, and viewing them in ways that might be unique or otherwise, right? And that's why this process works. That's why parties are willing to contract outside of a court system and have 3 or 1 individuals decide this for them. And so we owe them that, I think, and I agree with you. So
thank you. And I think you said that perfectly. I don't have anything to add. So let me move to number 2. Arbitrators should reflect the constituencies they serve and the composition of the community.
Good. So I agree with you. And here's where I think is one of our challenges. And I was thinking about this recently, and we have our communities, and I'll just talk about the legal field right now, are not representative of our society. I don't know if you agree or not, but I would.
I do.
Okay, good. And so that's one hurdle right now. That's a problem, right? And so in terms of we're really going to be representative the best that we can and learn and understand, there is we're short in terms of that opportunity or need. And so therefore, I would, as we look to expand that, we have to look at and you can, so if you can focus in on, okay, here's a law firm and maybe he's doing great, or another one that's not doing great, or here's an institution, or here's a bar association, and you can point your finger at all those individually, but I don't think that's fair, because it's really a collective effort. Now, at the same time, collectivity won't change unless each of those start to make changes as well, right? And so that's why making this a dialogue is really important. And so I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I agree. I think there is some work and some what I would say again, being a little uncomfortable in getting us there.
Yeah. So if I just just to put a bow on that, the supply side is an issue. Even if we want the arbitrators to reflect the community, no, there's a lack of supply.
That's right.
And that's something that we're going to talk about a little bit more as well. But let me get to the third one, which is widening the pool of arbitrators will encourage better performance and greater efficiency.
Let me think about that for a minute. I do think that there is a balance of competitive nature that helps in the community, right? If you have 100 cases a year, and you have 500 arbitrators, and they know it's set and they know it's gonna, and they don't have to dig a little bit deeper, they don't have to work a little more efficiently, then I think that's right. And so I agree with that there should be a marketplace of arbitrators, in that I can't, or an arbitrator cannot sit by and not improve. I mean, you look at today, and arbitrators need to be more virtual, right? That's a fantastic example, and I have my own view that there will be a percentage of arbitrators that will, depending on how this plays out, stop serving or not be able to serve as much because of this, right? Unless they change their skill set. So I think that new arbitrators are fantastic. Inclusion, absolutely. My only point is I would challenge you to an extreme high number of arbitrators that oversaturate the case where there is so and this would even hurt for diversity purposes, I believe, because if you, let's say we have let's say 800 arbitrators on the ICDR list. If we doubled that with members of different diversities around the world, that sounds great, but my problem immediately is half of those or more of those are not going to get any selection as arbitrators just because of the numbers, right? And so I think you have to be a little careful about how much you add to a list in terms of a ratio of cases.
Right. So you have to right size because you ultimately want everybody to get an opportunity.
Right.
Okay. Anything to add there, Kwadwo?
Thanks, Steve. I just wanted to add, and this is a slight nuance really on the point one, and that is be interested to have your perspective on some of the studies from the corporate world, which show how corporates with diversity at board level actually enhance financial performance. Whether you think there's an analog there for the decision-making process in arbitrations where there's a diverse tribunal.
I think so. I mean, let's be honest. Intellectual capacity, I believe, is expanded when we bring in different perspectives and different ways of thinking and analyzing decision making. And so I think there's a corollary to that. I don't struggle with that at all. I think that's with human nature, and that's, I think, one of our struggles in any society is when we start to get so focused on this way or that way, in any regard, in any stance, we're in trouble, I believe, right? And the more that we can say, okay, I've learned this, I think this. What do they think, and why do they think it? That expands the awareness and the thought processes. So agreed, wholeheartedly.
And thank you very much, Steve. My next point was just in relation to the fact that we are obviously in a competitive landscape. So arbitration is one means of dispute resolution. There are others, and equally there is competition amongst institutions to attract parties and counsel to use them. What's your perspective on how addressing diversity can feed into and help those considerations of attractiveness and relevance, which could potentially give a competitive edge?
I think, it's probably in some ways first anecdotal, right? Where communities are able to know of and see of and feel comfortable with the composition of different lists and panels on an institution or a law firm or whatever that might be, right? And that takes time. I think, I remember a colleague of mine looking in terms of a law firm marketing, and marketing is great for programs and things like that. But I think when you start, if you're marketing this, I'm a little uncomfortable with it in that sense, just personally, because I think it's you've got to be authentic about it, right? And you need to make sure that you are true to the message that you are advertising. And so I think we'll talk about diversity. In programs we have and we will, right? And I think we have to be honest in terms of the challenges that still exist and the things that we're doing and the goals that we have towards those ends. So I think it is, I think there is, I guess I would see the benefits organic and authentic and anecdotal as good as anything, right? An old PR friend of mine said it's better if someone else is telling your story positively than you, right?
Definitely true. What? Anything else, Kwadwo? You good now?
Nothing else.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's switch gears. One of the things that I think makes diverse people uncomfortable about the whole international arbitration space is not really and the appointment of arbitrators is not really understanding the process and how the appointment process happens from A to Z. So I thought it would be a good time to just have you tell our audience and let everybody know, look, what happens? What happens from a recruitment standpoint? What happens from the time a case comes into the door to the time somebody is seated as an arbitrator?
Good. Okay. I'm going to go down two different pathways here. All right. Because
Okay.
I think they're both important. Let me start with the institutional perspective of what we see in the ICDR, and then I'll talk about what we see as the party appointed, which correlates, but I think there's some points to bring up there. So on a ICDR level, when I first came in, I think we had 400 arbitrators, let's say, and that was a long time ago, and the ratio was probably pretty high to the caseload, and we've grown up to about 1,000 cases a year over the last 5 or 6 years, and again, more than any other arbitral institution in the world in terms of international cases. So that's great, and about 800 arbitrators to that ratio. So historically, for us, when we built the panel, we looked for arbitrators who have bona fides, that have an international profile, that have maybe they're multilingual, maybe they have a real strong level of expertise in construction, technology, energy, whatever the industry is that correlates to cases that we have. So those are all just big picture items, right? And so right now, there's two ways to get on our panel. One is people apply, and two is we recruit. Now, I think these are really important parts because one, I can only recruit so many people that I know, right? I can't, or we know as a team, and we have committees. And I assure you, every time I met with our California committee just a few weeks ago, and I said, please send me names. And diversity is important to us, right? These are all a lot of corporate lawyers and lawyers in law firms, right? And so these are things that we're doing. But again, I only know so many people. And so people applying is another way to do this, which is also helpful. But I'm going to tell you that I see a great disparity in diverse and non-diverse applicants to our panel. And it's just, and I haven't done the analysis. I haven't gone through, and it's gotten better over the past few years. But in the early years, it was not great, and so we would have to really balance our efforts by recruiting in what we were doing, right? And so I tell people, if I'm meeting with them one-on-one, I say, I need you to apply. This is part of the process, right? We want you to apply. And even when we recruit, I'll tell you another quick story that I think is important here. We were recruiting an individual who was diverse, and we're at the table, and we were talking, and I was kind of asking, hey, do you want to be an arbitrator? And this person kind of looked at me like I was crazy, and then said, I've got a practice to go to. I've got to be a lawyer. What are you thinking? I was rebuked, and I'm okay. Sorry for asking, right? Then I got up and I gave a presentation to the same audience about diversity. And about a week later, I got an email essentially apologizing and saying, I'm interested, right? So it goes to those ends that our community and our culture and our system don't always invite these sorts of activities, right? If you have a young, promising junior associate or senior associate or junior partner, and they're really busy, do they have time to consider building that arbitrator profile? I don't think so, unfortunately. And maybe not, maybe they do. I hope they do. But so anyways, that's a little backdrop on the recruiting challenge. And there's other times where we'll reach out to people and their interest is not great. It should be. I mean, they're in this community, but they're too busy or otherwise. So that's all right. So that's and we'll go through our review process, and we invite people to our panel that are either applicants or that are recruited. Sometimes we say no to people, just depending on maybe their experience is not great, maybe they need a little bit more, or whatever the case might be, or maybe they're not international enough. Sometimes that just happens, right? Then from there, we'll offer training, and then we'll put them on our list. And then from there, within our system, we have listings of cases. So a case comes in. A lot of times, parties use this party-appointed approach, and I'll get to that in a minute. But for now, if they don't have a way to select an arbitrator, we'll build a list. And maybe that's a list of 15 names for 3 or 10 for 1, or something, some variation of that. And we'll ask the parties what they want on that list and what's important to them. And we ask, and we build that according to the demographics, the language needs, the place of arbitration needs, that we hear expertise and all those things. We have a threshold of diversity on every list that goes out. And it's really important. And our system triggers, if we don't meet that threshold, it's triggered to say, you know, this panel is not diverse enough. And they'll go back and make adjustments. So the diversity, I think it's important to comment on this a little bit. So we survey all of our arbitrators and ask them about diversity, right? It's a volunteer response survey. And if they classify themselves as diverse, that goes within our system as diverse. And that could be gender, it could be ethnic, racial, and all those categories. We don't classify them as in those different categories. It's diverse or not diverse, right? And so that's, and some people I've noticed do that, some don't, right? So we're limited a little bit by that volunteer system. It's progress, but it's not perfect, I guess. So after we build a list, we send that to the parties, and then they can strike and make from there. And we're at that point, we're really in the control of the parties, right? That's we can do all we can do at that point. Now, I should say, in the listing process, these are case managers, you know, great staff across the organization, and they are human beings just like you and I. And if they have an arbitrator who's responsive and kind and helps and is thoughtful, they're probably more likely to list an arbitrator that it works like that than one who is not collaborative, who's not following deadlines or otherwise. It's just human life, right? And so that's right. An easy lesson, and I've seen that play out over the years quite a bit. So those are and good resumes and things, and people who have the right experience. And so that's the process for AAA and ICDR in a nutshell. Let me go to this party appointed approach as well. I think this is where, you know, you have a commercial dispute, and the contract calls for each party to select their own party appointed arbitrator. And then they go, and a lot of these law firms know the community well, and they just go select someone they know or they think has the expertise, and they select them themselves. And one of the things that we'll do as much as we can is provide resource or reference lists, or maybe they need help selecting the chair, or all of those things, and those things that we do. And we seek to do the diversity goal there just the same, right? Why wouldn't we? And even in that regard, we've had team discussions. Let's say there's a list of 10, right? And why do we have to stick to a list of 10 if we can show greater diversity with a list of 12? And I think in terms of experience, that's probably the exception a little more than the rule, generally speaking, but we try to let's enhance that the best that we can.
So a corollary to that, I asked you about, Steve. So the 10, I get the adding, but why is there some reason for 10? I mean, why can't it be 3
Um,
and achieve the same diversity goals? I guess.
I think I think a range of decision making. So I think is one. I would also say if we know lawyers, and you think about jury selection, for example, and strikes, and I think historically it might come from that. And we also want to have parties give, even with going back to kind of the jury example, striking potential, jurist decision makers from a list, right? And so I think that's the concept. And in full candor, I would rather give, and your point's well taken in this, but if I have a big commercial dispute and they're looking for 3 names, I might give 20 names. And I do that in the spirit of, okay, they know their dispute better than I do, right? They've told me some of the hot points, they've told me some of the key words, but they know it better than I do. And so if I give them 5 additional names, and one of those extra names is a home run or someone who's really good in that area, better for them, right? And so I think that's the philosophy, is a customer service approach, is what I would say.
I understand that. And one thing I also want to say is I think you mentioned how critical the case managers are and how great they are. So I have on my list to mention those that I work with, just to give them a shout out that if they're listening. So so anybody who's on the AAA rosters, build your relationships with your case managers, because they're not only good, but they're critically important to you getting on the list and you getting opportunities.
That's really interesting point, and I think I can definitely see the importance of that. Steve, what's the diversity position amongst the case managers themselves, and are there considerations by the ICDR with regard to ensuring diversity among the case management staff?
Yes, there is, and historically, it's really, as one of our arbitrators once said, quoting anecdotally, he said, walking into our office in New York is like walking into the United Nations, is what he said, and it's a nice group of multiple languages, Spanish and French and others, and that are available there, Russian, and so. That's the idea. That's the concept. And these are lawyers with LLMs that come from different parts of the world, even, right? Dual citizens, and so that's the backdrop, the backbone, really, of kind of what we offer there. And it's something you could always improve on and keep an eye on. But I think if I was, I think our team's really pretty good in this regard.
Oh, that's great to hear.
Thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about, and you talked a little bit about this before. There are a lot, in order to really, really increase diversity, there are a lot of stakeholders in the process who have to be engaged in making sure that this happens. But I want to, because we have you here today, I want to focus on the responsibility of the arbitral institutions in increasing racial diversity. So can you talk a little bit about how you view your responsibilities in the organization?
Yeah, I think for us, and it's something I've just we and my team, is our team as well, intuitively try to as we go, right? And that's probably a good thing and probably a weakness at the same time, because it's reactive and sometimes, and not necessarily as proactive as we need to be. But in a reactive sense, in candor, where we have, I can think of a variety of programs and events and things where I've come in contact and discussed and rubbed shoulders with people of different diversity around the world, right? And it's been fantastic. I mean, probably, one of the best parts of my job is that opportunity. And so when I'm able to do that and find a connection and an interest and also requisite experience and expertise, I ask those questions. Have you thought about being an arbitrator and those sorts of things? So on an opportunity level and kind of a reactionary level where opportunity provides, we're doing I think a really good job. But I think on a proactive level, there's probably more things that we can do. I think, for example, I don't know, you might have seen published recently from a conference this summer, a list of African descent arbitrators. And I thought that we reviewed that, and a very helpful document. A number of those arbitrators are on our list. We have a number of African descent arbitrators who are on our list who are not on that list as well. And so that's something that we're reviewing now and looking at and analyzing. And the expertise of some great arbitrators on that list. Some obviously don't meet necessarily international profile, maybe some different backgrounds and practice areas, right? But what a great resource that is, and something that's helpful for us as we do this our reviews and discussions annually. I think another level of work that we can do, and it's something that's come up more recently, is what I would call capacity building. And one thing that I think, Charles, you mentioned was our Higginbotham program that we've worked with since 2009 in building diversity within the community, right? We think that's really important, and we started that back then and continue to really work on that as one of our main goals, organizational goals. And this is a goal that goes towards our committees, making sure there's diversity on our committees, making sure there's diversity on our faculty lists, and all those things. And those things are all actually really important as well, because I've been on a lot of committees organizing events, and there are some who get really comfortable, I'll use that word again, just inviting the same old, right? And I'm not a fan of that. I think we owe it to ourselves on an educational integrity level to expand our pool of faculty and arbitrators and so on, right? We owe it. We're going to be better if we do it, right? And why would we limit ourselves? So it's a win-win, as they say in mediation, not necessarily arbitration, but going back to that point. So on another level of proactivity, capacity building, I think there's also certain jurisdictions or maybe communities to where we might have an ability to go in and provide training or otherwise that could help. And maybe, the proportion of diversity in there, for that community, it's not diverse at all. But there might be different countries and so on, where we might be able to do that and add to our diverse panel composition overall, if that makes sense. So those are just nuances and thoughts, but there's got to be a balance of proactivity and reactivity in terms of what we're doing on a day-to-day level. That I think we've done a pretty good job, but we need to do a little bit better. And the other part, I think, is challenging our own community to work with us. And that's hard, because I've done that. And sometimes the response we get is it's reactive to what they know. And as you've already said, we have a supply problem, right? And so it's going to be hard until it's going to be a challenge, I think, and we have to work through that, be uncomfortable, and be probably proactive.
Well, perceived challenge, I would say. And I'm glad you mentioned the list of arbitrators of African descent, because I'm on that list.
I know that.
And I'll just let me just say, Catherine Simpson, as well as Nancy Everin and others have done a great job of putting that list together. So thank you guys for getting our names out there, and hopefully you're listening to this now. So I know you talked about a lot of things that you're doing from the diversity perspective. I wanted to make sure that we covered everything that you wanted to mention, and also just get an idea of if there are things that you've seen other organizations doing that the ICDR is thinking about incorporating.
I think I've alluded to a lot of the things that we're doing. I know that we have working on these discussions and trying to work through this on an internal level, our teams, and just to make sure we understand as an organization these opportunities and needs that we need to focus on this as well. I think I guess just not seeing anything other than maybe you know, let me tell you just something else we've done. We're attending and participating, and I've gone to an organization called NAMWolf, which is a diverse bar association. I think that's great. We send a number of our executives to that every year, and that's a really good opportunity for us just to get to know other people in a social level that's comfortable. That's great, right? And so that's a good example of doing things. And so I think. It's going to take efforts on a community level to really grow this as well. I alluded to this where I've talked to a number of individuals of African descent, for example, and good conversations, but trying to invite them to submit their application or otherwise, and maybe they're too busy, or maybe the timing's not right, and that's okay. This is a personal decision, right? And that's fine, but those are I want to make sure it's not part of not feeling welcome, or maybe the community doesn't. And so those are all dynamics that I can't answer perfectly from where I sit. I can invite, I can help, I can discuss, I can do everything that I can, but there might be some things that I might be limited to. I'm not sure. So those are just random thoughts.
Yeah, Leah, I think absolutely things like this that you're doing, this discussion today, and just talking about the process and helping people understand what you're doing, and also understanding that diversity is important to the organization. Those are things that I think they're going to make people more comfortable coming to you, and you actually might have an overabundance of applications you might have to consider. So.
This is it's inviting.
Sorry.
No, don't apologize at all. We would welcome. As I said, our doors are open, right?
Okay. Let me throw a couple of things out at you. I read a lot of literature. As you know, there's a lot out there on kind of diversity in the international space. And I want to just throw out some of the ideas that occurred to me is things that might move the needle. Have you considered specific rule changes that go towards diversity? Is that something you've considered?
So I've been a part now of probably a handful of rule changes or rule writings, and I think, and this goes to your point earlier, where I think I'm pretty open-minded, but I'm probably not in the full scope of understanding different perspectives, right? And that's just because I can't, because I can only bring in my experience, right? So, but with that foundation, we include other committees and members of different jurisdictions and diversity in our efforts for rule making and rule changes, which we think is important. And so that foundationally is helpful. I can't think. I'll tell you, going forward, I think our rule, the virtual and technology, might be a separator for some. I'm hoping not, but we need to keep an eye on that, right? And just to be careful of access, right? A rule process is going to create challenges, or arbitration now will create challenges for maybe access, and that could affect a variety of demographics, right? And so we need to be thoughtful about that. And I think we have been and will continue to be for that, but I can't think specifically of of a rule that would change or enhance or make better based upon a diversity issue. We have, he or she type language is something that it has changed over the number of years now, which is good, right? And so I think nuances like that, yes, but I'm open to suggestions if I'm missing something.
Okay. I don't know if I have any suggestions off the top of my head. I think the good thing is that you do have benchmarks that you have as an organization. I mean, maybe making those actual rules that people can see might move the needle a little bit. It might not, but or I think just the idea of publicizing those and letting people know that there is a requirement, and like you said, that there's actually a a notice that's generated from the computer when your list is not diverse. I think that's a great thing in itself. Another thing. Sorry, Kwadwo, did you want to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say something I was interested in, Steve, and that is measurement. Because what I feel is if we aren't measuring progress and objectively recording relevant data, it's very difficult to see where we're doing, where we're going, and where we're getting to. What I was interested really, and I've heard some of your interesting comments about how questionnaires are given to the arbitrators and so on, is how the ICDR is really using that data and how you see opportunities to use that data more effectively, perhaps to measure where we are and where we want to get to.
That's a good point. We do obviously use that data internally to help us kind of meet our diversity goals of listings, and that's helpful. We also, there's this balance and tension of privacy and making sure that and we go to a lot of work for security and privacy as an organization. So I think that's a good balance. I think your question's really good, Kwadwo, to think about how we can maybe improve this a little bit or measure this a little bit better, right? It's hard because the surveys that come in are essentially confidential, and so us reporting data that's based upon confidential surveys is a challenge. But I think it's worth a consideration for further analysis and further thinking on how to benchmark, because you're right, unless you benchmark or understand where you're at, it's hard to make progress, right? And I was just thinking about the diversity of a certain country recently that I've been working with, and I think in some ways it's getting better, but I also think there's challenges there that need to be thought about, right? And so that's just me as a bird's eye view thinking about things, and so that's one person, right? But that information would be helpful. It's the challenges there are as well.
But yeah, thank you, Steve. That makes a lot of sense, and I can see both the challenges and the opportunities that data does present.
Going back to some of these considerations, have you also considered blind selection? Is that something you talked about?
I've not talked about that. So is that blind selection from a staff perspective or from a party perspective?
From a party perspective. So when the parties get the list, there's not names, there's just information about capabilities, experience, and that type of thing. And I understand it's not perfect because a lot of that can be used to determine who the person is, right? You can reverse engineer it. But is that something that you at least consider?
Redaction is a challenge, right? To just like a translation, all those things.
Right.
I've not heard of that in full honesty. I think it's an interesting idea. I think there are challenges there. I will tell you, I think, and you can tell me I'm wrong, but I would argue that, let's say hypothetically we had a list today of that was 50 or 60% diverse candidates on a list of arbitrators. I don't think that I think law firms, I guess what I want to say is law firms and corporations have a much better mindset in terms of diversity than they did even 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And even some of them challenge, if we send out a list or something like that, I've heard this anecdotally that they want lists or candidates who are more diverse, more women or more diversity of race or otherwise on lists. And I think that's, corporations and law firms can challenge that. That's great, right? There's nothing wrong with asking for a different list composition based upon what they need or want. So I guess what I'm saying is, I think in certain circles, I think the selectability of arbitrators would be improved, but at the same time, I think there is this old, we want to select an arbitrator that we know that has the experience, that has done this before, and that's the catch-22 that we need to get over a little bit, right? That's a challenge. So I think blind selection is interesting. I think if I know lawyers, I think that would be a struggle. So
Okay.
Unfortunately, but.
Well, one more. So we talked about this a little bit. But what about the way? And look, I know that a lot of case managers are very deliberate in the way that they compile the strike list. But is there a way that you can compile the strike list where diverse lawyers would get a better opportunity to be seated on the panels? Because here's the thing: is, as you said, you have the diversity benchmark and I think that accomplishes a lot. That said, when you put a diverse person who might not be as well known on a list of, that person is one person on a list of 10 with 9 other arbitrators who are kind of your typical, let's call it white male arbitrators who have been selected over the course of 20 years, are you giving that diverse arbitrator a real opportunity of being seated the way that stakeholders in the process usually choose an arbitrator? Are there different ways that you can compile the list?
Yeah, I would say that there's probably, and I know this might vary in different markets in different industries and different places around the world, right? But I would say there's probably a broader diversity of listing than parties know, and that does vary depending upon the type of case, right, and the location and all those factors, and what the parties ask for too, right? I mean, in terms of experience. So those are challenges. I think actually that there is a give and take there. In some ways, I think a diverse candidate, 2 or 3 on a list, might stand out more than the others, and provide a unique selection opportunity and so on. I hear your point, and there is this historical. This person's already done it. We know who they are. They've decided it, a preference as well. I know that exists, so I'm not going to ignore that. I guess what I would say is this: the diversity goals that we have on lists are what I would say a step of progress. And I can give you anecdotal experience of professionals who, in my mind, have gone from maybe an occasional selection of an arbitrator to being fairly busy based upon a diversity goal. That's great, right? That's changed what I would say the experience level in a community, different perspectives and different views. So our goals are good. I think they're really good. They're helpful. They're building towards something, but I think we need to look at this as a step-by-step process as well. And I hear what you're saying on the balance of and supply in terms of markets and what we can do there. But I also think that as the community and as arbitrators and as institutions and law firms all look towards this and supply candidates to be considered, or are willing to say that maybe this list here isn't what we expected, and cordially even, hey, can you change the dynamic of this list? We want at least a higher percentage of diversity. So those are a few thoughts. It doesn't totally solve your scenario, Charles, but I think it does give a perspective of progress, and I'm open to ideas if there's something else that we can do. I've written some
Can I
notes.
throw in an idea, Steve?
Yes, please.
Well, I notice under Article 6 of your rules governs emergency measures, and that will obviously potentially encompass the appointment of an emergency arbitrator, which I presume wouldn't be done by a strike list. That would be a straight appointment. Could that be an opportunity for building experience and getting perhaps lesser known diverse arbitrators into the circuit and in front of parties and building a profile which might lead to further appointments in future?
I think yes, and we do consider diversity on those appointments because they are administrative appointments, and so we're looking at expertise. We're looking at in some ways, location, the seat of maybe the law of the case, and those type of dynamics all play into it. Diversity is a criteria we discuss on all those appointments. So agreed. We've do that and can continue to do that as well.
And I'll just say just a little anecdote. One of my early cases with the AAA was it was an emergency relief case that Kelly Turner, who recruited me to the panel, brought me on, and I'm sure diversity was a consideration as well as my vast experience and all of that stuff too. But thank you, Kelly, and it's been great. Let me ask you this. And how many of your appointments, and do you keep track of this, first of all, how many of your appointments are administrative appointments?
Yeah, it's very few. I did a little background just to, check and double check, but, between the list and the party appointed approach, I'm guessing upwards of 80% or higher are, by parties appointing or party appointed or through the list or otherwise, or agreeing themselves. So our administrative appointments are really rare. Emergency arbitrators is one, and then it comes down to when parties just can't agree on anything else, or there's a challenge or other challenges, and we have to step in and maybe do an administrative appointment. So it's rare.
So one of what we've talked about the stakeholders in this process and the arbitral institutions as being one. Obviously, one is us, me and Kwadwo and our law firm. So now we want to give you the opportunity to turn a microscope back on us and tell us, look, what we need to be doing to help you in this process, in this diversity process.
I just want to talk about a few different things. One is community, right? And I know that I said at least 3 or 4 times that we're an open door policy, right? I think that door needs to flip both ways. And there are times where, just as you mentioned, you feel you were recruited because of your excellent capabilities and experience. I agree, and also you bring diversity. That's great. I have no problems with that, right? And in a professional setting, I think it's fantastic. And we can talk idealism in another day, but for where we're at and what we're trying to do, I think that's great. I think as much as institutions have open doors, I think communities of Black or other racial diversities need to have open doors as well. And maybe, we went to NAMWOLF to try to do that. Maybe there's other groups or settings that that we should be invited to, right? Then maybe we're not. And I'm sure that's the case. And that's okay. I'm not offended. I'm not picking on you two or anybody, but I think what I'm saying is the door goes both ways, right? And one of our challenges is getting to know qualified lawyers and professionals who can serve as arbitrators. And we can't do that in a vacuum, right? And that happens by recommendations, introductions, and all those things that come with that, right? And those things take time, right? I think what I would say is relationships. You know, I can be introduced to someone at a reception or via email, and that's great. But it takes time sometimes, and we can look at a resume, and that's great and helpful. And but I think patience is also good. I'm not saying for years or anything like that, but relationships take time. So the other point I would invite or have considered, it was a lesson I learned a while back, and I've organized a lot of conferences over the years, and as a not-for-profit, we really need sponsorship monies, and it's not contingent. We usually get a handful of sponsors for each event, but we often invite faculty to do that. And what I was noticing after a little bit in our efforts to make our faculty more diverse is that certain diverse groups, gender and race, weren't getting sponsorships, and I was curious. And it was a pattern, and I thought, how dare that law firm not support that diverse individual, right? And I was mad at this point. I'm frustrated because I'm like, this is not right. And that might have been the scenario, but I really actually think the scenario is more often this candidate wasn't asking for the money, and it wasn't going anywhere past their email, which is fine. That's their decision. But I guess my point is this: if we are in a world of competition and marketing, put your money where your mouth is, right? And stand tall, right? Let's not be afraid to ask for the sponsorship as Charles being the top bill of a program, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. And so I guess that's my other challenge: is one is first is community, two is stand tall, and fill the role and the position and the profile of an international arbitrator, and that's that comes with just all those things of confidence and community and networking and so on. So those are two thoughts that I think are helpful and for me, I think helpful, right?
Yeah, and those, you made very good points. Look, I think from a law firm perspective, how things work when you're talking about writing those checks, a lot of times the diverse people aren't holding the purse strings because a law firm is like everything else. I mean, you're talking about the pale, male, and stale. I mean, that's the same deal in the law firm. So they're the ones who are holding their purse strings a lot of times, and I think there's a reticence to go and ask for money and ask for sponsorship because you just don't know what response you're gonna get. But we have an international arbitration group, and which Kwadwo and I are both members of, and Kwadwo is probably better friends with the people holding the purse strings than me, but we're gonna make sure we send them this. So when we do need that sponsorship, that they're gonna hear your voice as well as ours.
And it has nothing to do with the money. It's the support and the message that brings, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
I completely agree with you. And look, I mean, I think just like anything else, I mean, the people in diverse communities, we were socialized a little bit differently, and we're not as comfortable going out and asking for money as others might be. And I think that's probably a little bit of what you're probably seeing. But like you said, something we need to change.
Yep, that's my challenge, I guess. If that's the scenario, then that's my challenge.
Okay. Anything else for us? Like, how can we improve? How can we help?
I think programs like this are great. I've really enjoyed just the conversation. I think I think being uncomfortable is actually needed in a lot of ways in our society today, and that's just being willing to have the conversation, being willing to look at things that we haven't looked at. So I think this is great. I think we need to continue the conversation anecdotally or otherwise in going forward and expand to the conversation with others. So that's on my side and your side, whether you're a law firm or others, then I think that's where we move forward. And you've given me some good ideas and thoughts that I've written down as well. And if you have more, I'm open to them going forward.
Thank you. You've given us good thoughts and good conversation as well. It's been very enjoyable. But let me get this in, Kwadwo, before we close out. Like I told you, I gotta give shouts out to my people from the AAA. I would be remiss if I didn't do it. So just some wonderful people at your organization, Steve, and that I'm very fond of. But let me just mention them. Sasha Carbone, hello, how you doing? Svetlana Gitman, Shireen Gomez, who I work with a lot. Hey, Shireen. Matt Lacey, who I'm on a significant arbitration with now, as well as Kelly Turner, who I mentioned before. And then there's a bunch of case managers on the consumer side that I work with. There's too many of you guys to name. But I just want to thank all you guys because I've gotten great opportunities to the AAA.
And so I would just like to say, Steve, again, thank you very, very much. I think it's been great to hear about what ICDR is doing, and great that you've come on this platform to share this with our listeners. One final thing I wonder if I could just ask you. If you had to distill down your message in a sentence or two to aspiring arbitrators from diverse communities, what would that be?
Good question. I would invite them to, in a collegial, professional way, meet new people, go and attend. I know this is hard under pandemic circumstances, but attend key events, write articles, and this is what I tell everybody who asks me, how do I break into this world, right? And the advice is the same. And the difference I would say is to be a little more assertive and uncomfortable yourself socially, right? That's true for everybody. And I think we're all in this paradigm of trying to be comfortable. And I think that is required that we push ourselves. Maybe that's easier said on all sides, right? And that's good. That's a socially positive outcome of new relationships, new opportunities, and learning new things. So I think that's my thought. Concluding with that. So.
Okay.
Thank
well,
you.
I think that punctuates it. I think we should probably stop there.
As you wish. So.
All right. So look, I mean, thank you, Steve. This was wonderful.
Okay. Thank you again, both. It was a treat. Thank you very much. I enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, and really, really nice to meet you, Steve. It's been really great and really interesting to hear from you.
Pleasure to really, Mike. All right. Have a great evening and day, and we'll look forward to talking soon.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you have any suggestions for topics or want to reach Kwadwo Sarkodie or Charles Harris, you can find them at the Mayer Brown website, mayerbrown.com. Also, to learn more about other Mayer Brown audio programs, please visit mayerbrown.com/podcast. Thank you for listening.